Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, brought to you by Byrne Production Services. Here, we explore the different ways business events can bring value to your organization, the latest technological advances in the event space, as well as providing you with actionable strategies to make a business event a success. Let's create an exceptional event experience.
Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the business events podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Kazarian, CEO and founder of Accelevents in Miami. His journey started in investments and finance, but for the past 9 years, he's been providing and innovating his leading event technology platform. Oh, and he's just become a dad. So congratulations, John, and welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple weeks now.
Yeah, how tired are you?
Pulling through.
Yeah, absolutely. I make a joke about, before my kids, I had hair. And they're only about 10 years old. So that went pretty quickly. So tell me a little bit about your career so far and why you went from finance and investments to founding this business.
Yeah. So, I had been hosting events, call them more social events for a while. And I was working at a hedge fund in Boston. And then, unfortunately, my cousin got sick and I wanted to do something for her. So I, having hosted a number of social events, decided to host a fundraiser. And I got 840 people to that first event. I rented out the aquarium in Boston. And then I was trying to find tech solutions to help run it. And everything out there was crazy expensive. The support was non-existent, or the tech just sucked. And ended up going with something which, is now a public company, and it was a disaster. Tech failed us the day of the event, couldn't get a hold of anybody. And at that point, I'm just look, events are hard enough. Tech has to be there to make life easier for organizers. And I spent the past 9 years focused on that problem. Yeah, excellent.
And so, we've all experienced those, especially throughout the pandemic when everybody sort of shifted into virtual. It seemed like, what was the statistic I heard the other day? There's 385 different virtual platforms out there.
Yeah.
And certainly 2.5 years ago, none of them really worked. It was interesting that support that you just mentioned wasn't there because it was a bunch of software engineers who were thinking like software and SaaS companies where, if you do a service ticket, it goes into a queue, and we'll get to it when we get to it. And there was an amazing shift over those 2 years to, oh no, these events are happening in real time right now.
That's exactly it. It was a lot of people entering the space from a software perspective who had never hosted events before, and they didn't realize the sense of urgency that this industry commands. It's okay. ER doctors and military, sure. But beyond that, I can't think of an industry where there's a greater sense of urgency. There has to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick Borelli has a really great thing where he tries to bridge those gaps between, event people and tech, where in tech, it's, we are the best that we have been ever today, and we will only be better tomorrow. But in the sense of an event, you got one shot. There's no beta test that you can do.
Right.
And so, what do you now see, a couple of years into it and throughout the development of your platform and your company, what makes an excellent event in that virtual space?
Yeah. In terms of where we're at today, virtual is a portion of it, but we're probably 90% back to in-person, our customers. Now, of that 90%, I think it's something like 30% of them have a hybrid component to their event, but it's really a mixed bag. In terms of what is keeping attention today in the virtual space, though, you're going to like this answer. It's production value, right? Nobody needs, when you're competing against TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram having incredibly high production value, you can't just go out there and put together a crappy event with bad content that, looks like it's an analog TV.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right in that, a lot, especially in the B2B world. And this has been I think a shift in the last 5 to 10 years, but certainly more acute since the pandemic, that B2B brands are starting to realize that they have to compete with consumer media platforms for attention, like TikTok or Instagram or anything like that. And if a YouTuber can have amazing production values out of their living room, what is stopping you from doing that on site at your event? So the old adage of, we used to do hybrid events prior to 2020, but they were a camera at the back of the room and you got what you got, right? Now that I think everybody has to sort of step up their game, as you said, to light it properly, to make sure audio is balanced for broadcast and use more than one camera, for instance. And so, you mentioned, you're doing sort of 30% of your live events are all hybrid. Can you clarify a little bit for me what Accelevents does, like what you offer and what you love to do with that?
Yeah. So we're an end-to-end event management platform. So everything from speaker approvals and registration through exhibitor management, badge printing and check-in on-site, mobile app for attendees, and then obviously the virtual component that we've already talked about. And our premise is that everything we've done has been homegrown. Some of the other companies in the space have grown through acquisition, which leads to called a discombobulated, duct taped together experience for the attendees and the organizers, because you've got these different data silos from the different acquisitions. Attendees are using, your tech for one event. They don't want to have to create one password to register, another to access the app, a third to access the online portal. And then you've got speakers and exhibitors doing something else. That just doesn't work. It needs to be seamless. And that's what's been winning for us. It's just creating that unified experience for customers, which ultimately saves them time and stress, which nobody needs more of leading up to an event.
Absolutely. And so, I'm gonna point to a post that you recently did on LinkedIn where you were talking about swivel chair integrations.
Yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit more about that concept and why it's such a bad thing?
So the term comes from the 90s when you would have a local area network and you'd have like different PCs running different software all on that network. And you literally have to spin around to go from one PC to the other. That idea, unfortunately, hasn't escaped us because you still have this technology it's just glued together just like that. And I mean, we're seeing at the recording of this in Q1 of 2024, we're seeing more and more acquisitions take place because of market dynamics. And it's leaving customers with this swivel chair experience where it's not seamless. You are still basically switching tools. They just happen to be owned by the same company. You might not even be getting the same invoice for the two products.
And so what are your strategies for working alongside event clients and organizers and agencies to sort of integrate that? Like you had said, you were more homegrown. So are you integrating services and adding capabilities as you go along rather than, as you said, that acquisition strategy, which is, hey, we're a registration platform and we just, picked up a streaming company?
Yeah, no, we're very intentional about what we're building. We release every 2 weeks. We send release notes. We haven't stopped doing that for years. I don't think we haven't missed one of those 2 week cadences. But yes, we're constantly innovating. We have to. It means saying no a lot. Not necessarily no to a customer, more no like this would be really cool. Like, everybody wants to pivot to AI right now. We're like, okay, but is that actually going to make the customer's life easier? Is it going to save them time? Is it going to decrease stress? If it's not guaranteeing their event's going to go perfectly and can accomplish what they need to do, then we have to say no to it. But essentially, we're out there trying to build a platform that's going to bend, not break, for every customer need that fits within our personas.
Yeah, I really love that philosophy that, I recently attended a very large citywide conference for a large SaaS firm, and AI was plastered up over everything. And what it ended up doing was trying to force their customer base to learn something new to be able to integrate it into their system rather than them coming to it and saying, hey, we've made this easier on you using AI, which I think is a different strategy.
Yeah.
What methods of feedbacks and consumer analytics among this industry do you use to improve that product? I see that you spoke to some event organizers recently in a post where you compiled some interesting survey results. Can you talk us through what you learned?
Which post was that?
Oh, that's a very good point.
I can speak to one of the major ways that we get feedback and innovate is through the way that we support our customers. So I think because of how burned I was by that experience back in 2014, really set out to say, we're going to change the way that support is perceived in the event tech industry. And today, our median response time on chat is 18 seconds, 24/7, 365. Back then, it was probably, 2 minutes. I remember times where I would be on the highway and pull over to respond to a customer on a Saturday night. But the act of doing that meant that our customers knew that it wasn't like a bot. It wasn't like they were shouting at deaf ears. They knew that somebody was listening to the other end, and it made them much more inclined to share that feedback. And it could be something like an idea, or it could be something that's like, this toggle seems weird to me. Can you help me understand it? Things that you probably wouldn't go out of your way to say, or you would never put a support ticket in for, but because the chat was a real person, it felt like they were in the room with you. And that level of feedback allowed us to just innovate and improve at a much more rapid pace than I think we would have been able to do otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that's really great that you're able to bridge that gap that we were talking about at the beginning, which was, this sort of tech stack that is used to, actionable tickets that go into a queue, and we'll get to it when we get to it because there's, somebody's actioning it from all over the world versus somebody who's actually, with you in the room, quote unquote. And I think that's great. The post I was referring to is you were talking about the top 10 pain points that you had gathered from image and upload issues to CSV upload errors, downtime, and bugs and glitches. Like bugs and glitches seem to be, as I said earlier, that sort of tech world look at things to say, well, I mean, it works, but we'll be better tomorrow. But the desire of an event organizer is, but I want it to be full and done and ready when I do it in October, right?
So in terms of where we capture that information, I had something like 350 hours of customer calls in 2023. But we also have sales intelligence tools. So listens to other account manager and AE calls and is able to pick up on keywords. So it's kind of a combination of those two elements to understand what those pain points were. But when I was doing that study, what I was trying to identify is, why are people coming over to us? What is it that they're frustrated with? What are they experiencing with the existing solutions? Most of the folks that are coming our way, they're not switching from like Eventbrite and Excel. They're using a event management platform already. Like their event program is fairly well established, but there's something about the way that they're using technology today that's just not working for them. Maybe it's lack of flexibility, maybe it's how they're supported, or maybe it's just this constant challenge that falls in that list that's driving them nuts.
Mm-hmm. And so, looking at the events industry and its use of tech right now, what would you say is the least technologically evolved aspects of the industry today, and where do you think that should go?
I think the least technologically evolved would be just pure form-based registration. Right? It's like a CRUD operation, for an engineering term, that hasn't really changed in the past 20 years. Sure, maybe how we store the data, the UI is improved, but you still are filling out form fields. Where probably an element of improvement has come is through like Google pre-populating those fields for you. But I also don't feel that that's necessarily an issue. It's the sort of later steps of what happens next. What can we do with that information? How can we improve the attendee experience? How can we make check-in as seamless as possible? help the organizer with different workflows, that is where the opportunity lies today.
Yeah, excellent. And so in 2024, what do you sort of see from the attendee point of view, their sort of trends and desires going forward for events, whether they are in person, virtual, or anything in between?
I think the question is very different for those two formats. If somebody's interested in an event purely for content, why do I want to get on a plane for that? Virtual is an incredible opportunity for that. If, however, the primary focus is building my network, getting access to thought leaders in the industry, sure, you can do some of that through virtual, but there's certainly elements of being face-to-face that they're just more human in nature. And there's still a preference for that. And I think there will be for a long time to come. So that's what we're seeing today. It's more of those in-person events being focused on access to individuals, access to networking, and having those key conversations.
And so do you think event organizers, taking that kind of prediction in mind, should be shifting their sort of portfolio, as you said, content, education into the virtual, and more your live events are a party so that we can all glad hand and meet each other?
Well, I guess first of all, I don't actually love the idea of events getting mixed in with this idea of a party, or at least B2B events. I think there's almost too much of that. And in some ways it's detrimental to events. Like some events that have grown in profile quite a bit turn into too much of a party. And then what happens is you get really junior people who want to attend because they think they can get access to decision makers and they've heard the event is fun, but that kind of drives sponsors away and it drives other decision makers away. The more intimate events where you can have those conversations with somebody who is more of your peer, I think is more meaningful for a lot of folks, and that's what they're looking for. And sometimes those experiences happen within a larger event, but you have to create that. It doesn't happen on its own. So I guess that's one aspect. And then in terms of the content side of things, I certainly wouldn't drop content and programming at an event, but virtual has made it so much easier for us to add that as another mechanism. And if you look at the way that B2B marketing budgets are shifting, companies are spending less on direct response marketing, on AdWords, on paid media, and they're shifting to more of a content focus. So I would very much tap that channel if you're a B2B marketer, but I wouldn't drop content at an event.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think it's more about shifting the content at the event?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, that sort of conversation gets off the rails sometimes, is that people think, oh, we're just going to take all of our content out of our live events and put it all online. And so what are people doing? And so I think you're right that the default position is, well, I guess all we are left with is our networking and reception, right? Which cool lights and lots of cocktails and cool food and decor furniture, right? But do you think it's more about being more intentional with what content is at your live event versus on a virtual platform?
Oh, 100%. The lecture style content at events, sure, with like your keynotes and some bigger personalities, go for it. But interactive sessions are all the rage right now, and for good reason. I mean, it works. But you also have to be mindful of not every person, like a more introverted person might not be the one who wants to grab the microphone in that room of 150 people. So you got to build content for different personalities as well, and make sure that people feel comfortable and feel welcome finding the sessions that make the most sense for them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love this trend that I'm seeing right now, which is it's almost the death of the keynote. Like, because I mean, that was, again, a default position for many years. Like, hey, we've got Simon Sinek, and I'm just going to pick on him because I just listened to one of his podcasts. So we've got Simon Sinek, and he's going to show up and he's going to give a keynote, and he's got a really well prepared presentation. But now a lot of event organizers are pushing that content to say, well, Simon, please don't do your keynote. We just want to have a really like an intimate access to with our C-suite, right? Or with our executive business targets as a unique experience and perspective with Simon Sinek, rather than the keynote, which, again, great keynotes that he gives, but that was also at the Dental Alginate conference last week, right? So what's making it unique for our audience to come and meet him at this event?
So to go back to the death of the keynote, we both heard it for years, yet the keynote is still standing room only. So as much as everybody's been saying that, it hasn't fully gone away. And I know there's been a lot of studies on like, do you attend events for the keynote? And everybody says no. But again, you ask somebody about the event, and they're like, oh, is that the event that Michelle Obama is speaking at? So people do still, they still talk like that. They still act on it, even though they might say otherwise in a survey. But what actually makes that event more meaningful? Yeah, I agree. I mean, the opportunity to get a small group of people together to pick that person's brain. And you're even seeing it happen on the trade show floor, where instead of doing a happy hour on the trade show floor, speakers are bringing Simon to come stand in front of their booth and answer questions for 25 minutes. And that's driving a much higher level of engagement. But also to your point, like, yeah, he might have said that same presentation at a different event last week. He also said the same thing on his last 4 podcast episodes. So there's a lot of other mechanisms to get access to the information if you're just sitting there watching it like you're watching Netflix.
Yeah, 100%. And so then where do you see business events evolving in the next 5 years? And how are you positioning yourself, Accelevents, and how we should, the whole industry for that in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're doing this year is a roadshow of 25-person dinners. We're doing it with partners. And the goal is for that ultimately to lead into a conference that we'll host maybe at the end of this year or early next year. So it's kind of like a dipping your toes type of mentality on the smaller side of things, and then mixing that in with the larger programming, because those smaller events are a giant feeder for the big event. And once you've proven the value and proven the intimacy that you can create through those experiences, then people don't look and fret at that larger event and think it is just a party or just a keynote. In terms of where the B2B events are going, it's going to be a lot more partner-oriented organization of events, co-selling at events, co-selling in advance of events. And then, yeah, focused on the networking aspect, but in ways that are different than just that cocktail reception. And you're seeing that today already. You've got a lot of events that are more fitness focused, more outdoor activities or excursions that take place, and very intentional programming of who's getting mixed together for, say, a hike or something like that.
Yeah, I like that. That sort of leads back into the intention point, right? That, if we're going to bring, a bunch of C-suite people, middle management, vendors, sponsors, all of those, it's not sort of like, here's the room, come if you want to come, but we're purposely inviting you to participate in this experience with these other people. And these other sort of groups, because
and here's why, and here's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and here's what you're going to get out of it, and that works.
Yeah. So, what tactics are you finding right now for identifying key goals and objectives for events and clients? You had mentioned just a little bit earlier about some key metrics that you're looking at. But can you go into a little bit more detail of where you think that's going?
There's more and more focus. Let me back up. 5 years ago, I would say an event marketer would be measured on registrants. Today, an event marketer is measured on SQL, sales qualified leads. But a CMO is measured on revenue, or a CRO. I think there's going to continue to be a progression to evaluate event marketers and event marketing on the full funnel. And I think, and we're already seeing this, that event marketers are going to play a bigger role as even a second in command to the CMO, because it's the largest, usually 25% of the budget for B2B organizations, like the next largest individual line item. So given the size it is in the budget, and it's also usually the largest lead source, there's good reason for it. especially with everything that's going on with third-party cookie tracking, emails getting harder with the Google, the rules changes Google made on February 1st. So there's a lot of other reasons why I think events are going to be even more powerful in the future. But ultimately, yes, it comes back to monitoring the full funnel, not just did this person register for the event, but were we able to ultimately get an expansion sale from them, or were we able to convert them into a customer?
There's an interesting statistic that came out, at the beginning of 2024, or maybe the end of 2023, where, they were trying to do some measured analytics on the effect of events on sales and revenue numbers within sort of, 20 big companies. And I can't remember the specific numbers, but what it boiled down to was for every dollar that came into these 20 companies, 60% of it was influenced, not direct, but influenced by them attending an event. Yeah. And so if they were going to spend $1 million with your company, it's not to say that they would not necessarily have spent $600,000 of that, but their decision to spend the full $1 million was definitely influenced. And I think event professionals all across the industry know, we need data to back this up to our stakeholders to motivate action here. But are there any sort of strategies you think we can implement that sort of give us that sort of sentiment data, or that sort of soft influence data to track that success measure?
I think it really comes down to your marketing ops department and how you're measuring source attribution. I personally don't really like looking at influenced revenue. We don't use influenced revenue as a metric because how do you know if it's 1% or 90%? But if I look at, okay, we went to IMEX and within 90 days, these 18 people that we met with booked a demo with us, then I can attribute that book demo to the conversation we had at IMEX. So I think taking an attribution window and then tying it back to the event. And when I say an attribution window, that's for the first stage movement, right? Moving from an MQL to an SQL, or an SQL to an opportunity, tying that back to the event. And then the next component of it is revenue. So generally, we'd use a much longer, say, 12-month window for looking at revenue attribution that was associated with that conversion event.
Yeah, I don't know if every, especially in the B2B space, every organization is looking at that in a 12-month window like you are, right?
No, some of them are looking at a 30-day window when they have a 45-day sales cycle. It makes no sense.
Yeah, exactly. But even if you have a really short sales cycle, the influence that an event of any sort can have on that decision-making process is not always immediate. I think especially stakeholders within organizations think, hey, we just spent $1 million on it. How come in the first quarter afterwards, we didn't get $3 million back that we can directly link to it? Because that thought process might be, well, as in all B2B buying and selling, the need may not arise for 9 months, but because I attended this event, somewhere in the back of my mind is this company that I'm going to use to be able to fulfill my need at that point. And so that's where the disconnect, I think, happens in that data tracking. That yes, we spent $1 million on our big conference and it was amazing, but we didn't actually see the real impact of that revenue for, as you said, 12 months or later.
Yeah.
And so, lastly, just want to talk about, so cohort after cohort of sort of young people are coming into the industry. So what new trends are you seeing emerge from younger planners? And do you have hope for the future?
It's funny that you say that, because I actually feel like we're not getting enough people entering the industry. I think there's a lot of people that exited the industry because of the pandemic, and maybe there's a slight uptick now, but it's a stressful job. And there aren't always clear career paths within, I'll specifically speak to B2B event marketers, but there aren't always the most clear career paths. And I think one of the things that we can do as an industry is help to highlight those opportunities and what 5, 10, 15, 20 years out looks like, so that there's more incentive to join and there's more certainty on what the future could look like.
Yeah. Do you think it's and we run into this all the time, as you said, it's a hard industry. It is not a sort of usual 9 to 5 kind of job, as you mentioned, stopping your car on the side of the road on a Saturday night to answer an inquiry because it's your business, and that's when the demand came in. Do we need, as an industry, to add more structure to the training and succession planning within our industry?
Well, there's almost no training now. I mean, how many university programs teach anything related to events? There's some hospitality programs, but I think that's probably more on call it the planner side for even, go as far as say like wedding planning, but not so much on the corporate planning side. And there's also this interesting paradigm because it's like this creative role, but it's becoming this very quantitative role as well. And that in itself warrants a fairly unique personality.
Yeah, I think I mean, if I look at a lot of the customers that we service in this industry, say, the finance industry or pharma or whatever it might be, the idea of a management training program that is either company-wide or industry-wide is not a foreign concept. But in this industry, it is. And I think of a young person who was, as ambitious as I was when I first sort of came, wet behind the ears out of college, and really knew that I wanted to run a business or be upper management or whatever it was. And I would see friends of mine who went through a commerce program, who went to KPMG and joined the Young Leaders of Tomorrow program. And they were trained for 5 years while working as an accountant to become the next middle management, and then an upper management program, and so on and so on. We don't have that in our industry. And, I think it's what's seriously lacking, especially as we move into, as you had said earlier, being the right-hand person or just below the CMO in event marketing and management. And where do we think that needs to come from? Is it from individual companies? Is it industry-wide? Is it associations?
I don't know that we actually need to have as formal of a training program, because what you were just talking about, like I grew up in Boston, that was 90% of people did exactly what you were just referring to. But the difference here is that to be good in the event industry, you have to be a generalist. You have to be the person that's going to be able to go from being 18 feet in the air, changing a light bulb on a ladder, to sending out a 35,000 person email blast 4 minutes later, and then analyzing all of the data after the fact, and selling sponsorships and legal and all of these things. Right? It's like an apprentice model is the most effective.
Yeah, I love that. So just finally to wrap up, we always like to give our listeners who are event organizers and planners some practical steps. So what do you think, somebody listening to this episode should do, like right after listening, to sort of get a better handle on that intentionality in event content design?
I think it starts with taking some, like, this is going to sound ironic based on the last part of our conversation, but actually taking a more academic approach to your event programming and studying demand gen, full funnel analysis, and life cycle of a registrant or a lead, and being able to approach it, one, from that quantitative lens. And then once you can understand what the end goal is and not just focus on one stage, you're going to be able to think about programming that makes more sense to progress people through those stages.
Absolutely. So where can people find you if they want to reach out to you after this episode?
Yeah. You can find Accelevents at accelevents.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Kazarian.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining me today, John.
Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To find out more about Byrne Production Services and how putting on events can drive value for your business, visit byrneproductionservices.com. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Production Value Matters, thank you so much for listening.